I'm gonna go ahead and get started. People will be filtering in probably for another few minutes, but I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome to Unlocking Generative AI. I'll do that in a second. First I wanna actually kind of just gauge the crowd, because I was initially told this is gonna be in the business track, and now I'm in the technical track, and so now I don't know what to do. So, so I'm gonna try to gauge the crowd, like who here considers yourself on the business side, like director and up level type management? Hands, anybody? I see a few, okay. Who here is practitioners, consultants, whatever? Okay, so definitely more on that side. Who here is already doing stuff with AI? And when I say doing stuff with AI, I mean like you know what models are and how to use them, not I type into ChatGPT. Okay. All right, and then out of this talk, are you looking for more technical depth or just kind of like overview? What are the things I need to think about? Where just shout it out. Like, I guess. Tech? Okay. All right, I will try to accommodate you. That was not the intent of this talk. This talk was intended for more of the businessy kind of like, what are the things I need to be thinking about? What are my security risks? It went into tech a little bit, but then I saw I was in a technical track, so I added a couple slides last night, so I'll try to keep you happy. Shout out questions, because who am I is next. So, but not. All right, I don't know how many times I did that, but okay. Who am I? Let's start there. So one thing I'm gonna say right off the bat, one thing I've done in this presentation is all of the content that's video or visual is obviously AI generated. I've added the prompts to them, so for your viewing pleasure, you can see the fun prompts that I used to create the images that seem to be pretty fun. But who am I? I'm a recovering security consultant. I've been doing pen testing forever. I think like 13 years or so before I switched to in-house, which is where I've been for the last 3 years. So I currently am an in-house security professional for Salesforce, and in February, so I've been doing AI specifically for the last year, since February of last year when ChatGPT blew up the internet. And then in February of this year, I switched to a small 3-man team called Exploit AI within Salesforce, and my whole focus now is how do I break models, focusing on Salesforce models specifically. I'm also a core member of the OWASP LLM application top 10 thing, so feel free to talk to me about that if you want. So there's my creds. So what is generative AI? I think at this point we all know, right? So this talk was originally written, first presented in November, a version of this. So it was still kind of new, but I think we all pretty much know what it is. I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time here. If any of you are familiar with Brian Regan, he's got this thing where he talks about when he was in kindergarten, he made a science fair project called Cup of Dirt, and it was dirt in a cup, right? And that's what generative AI is. What is it? It's an AI that generates things. That's all I need to say about that. It learns from existing data, creates unique outputs, and it generates whatever you want. So there's a bunch of stuff that it generates, text and images, words, content, chemical formulas. It can help you do classification and things, all kinds of fun. But that's what makes it cool, is it generates things, right? That's why we like it more than predictive AI, which has been around forever, because it doesn't just let us make predictions, it makes cool stuff. That's also the problem with it, which is what we'll talk about. So the best way that I can describe generative AI, and especially the industry approach to it, is this. Imagine if someone came up to you and said, we're gonna build a web app. It's gonna talk to a database. Cool. We have no idea what data is in the database. We can't verify it directly, and we don't know how it got there or where it came from. A little less cool, but okay. Oh, and when we query the database, the information that comes back kind of seems legit, and it's presented in a cool and useful way, but sometimes it's entirely wrong and completely unhinged. That's what generative AI is. That's how we're using it, and the industry is like super all in for this and has been for some time. So that's the problem. So I presented this once before, and the audience was shouting out, and they're like, yeah, don't forget the part where the database sometimes re-remembers random facts and gives them out to other people without permission. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. And then the other one is, don't forget the part where the database misinterprets your requests and uses a plugin to DDoS your company's website. Yeah, that too. Right? DDoS is, generative AI is super fun. So what makes generative AI different? I already talked about the comparison with predictive AI. That's been around for a long time, right? 70s, maybe even earlier than that, was when we started doing AI. And predictive AI has been in the industry. At Salesforce, we've been using it for 10 years. There have been people that have been doing it longer, but that's probably about 10 years is about right for that, right? So what makes generative AI different? Two things. If you distill what makes it different, there's really two things that make it different. First one is it's non-deterministic. Some people call this stochastic, right? But what that means is you don't get the same thing every time. When you put in the same inputs, you get different results back. That's one of the first things that makes it different. The other thing about it, I don't know why this takes so long, because I'm pushing shift instead of next, that's why. It's extremely compelling for whatever reason, and I think we don't fully understand this just yet, but AI-generated content is really compelling. We love it. It speaks to us in ways that even content from other humans don't. There have been a lot of studies recently about, wow, that's really bad. How compelling generated content is. Couple of them have been with kids on Snapchat. If they see generated abuse content, it impacts them more than actual abuse content. So fake content hurts them more than actual people for whatever reason. The colloquial version of this that I can give you is I was talking with somebody at a conference, a vendor, in a vendor hall, and his wife has a hair care salon, and she had him write her bio up in ChatGPT for the website that she uses. And she saw a 30% plus increase in her business. And when she asked this new business, hey, why are you here? They said, because your bio was better than everybody else's. We respond really well. And I have my own thoughts on this. Like, if you think about it, we've taken all of humanity's history and summarized it and distilled it and trained a thing on it. It's super compelling, right? Of course, if you have that much background, you're going to be a good orator. And that's what AI is. So those, I think, are the two big things that we need to think about when we're considering how are we implementing generative AI in our content. It's non-deterministic, and it's really compelling, so we need to consider those. So what does non-deterministic mean? Output's going to be different every time, like I said. It's true even if you give it the same input and parameters. So I'm going to back up a minute. It looks like I'm reading. I've done something different this time in my slides. I've actually put in where I'm supposed to click, and I'm already completely ignoring my notes. So I apologize. I'm going to be kind of like flying here. But the key word to remember is that it generates, right? It's generating content. We want LLMs to be databases, and they're not. And we'll talk more about that and the implications of that as we go through this. But it generates content. You don't control the process. So the way that the generative AI works is you've got your inputs, it goes into the input, you've got this little black box that happens, and then output comes out. We can't see inside that black box. Even when we're training, it's a hidden layer. We can't see it. We're working to try to get transparency into it, and we've got things we can do to kind of monitor as it goes through, but we don't know when we're even training. We don't know why the AI is deciding to focus on some things more than others. It just does. And that's an unsolved problem, is like, how do we get observability all the way through the process right now, right? So we're doing it wrong because we're using generative AI to do things other than generate, and I'm being a little bit unfair to generative AI because it's also really good at classifying and doing some things like that, so I'm a little bit unfair because I'm not focusing on that. But if you're not using generative AI to generate things and you want it to retrieve content, you're doing it wrong. And to the point of why does AI do what it does, I gave Bing the prompt, we're doing it all wrong, and it gave 4 pictures back, and all of them were some version of an earthworm in front of a chalkboard. I don't know why. So again, very compelling, right? So one of the things about it being very compelling is we tend to overlook or ignore or just not be aware of when it makes errors. So I loved this picture, and then after I put it in the slide deck, I realized that the words are wrong. right? So, and I hadn't caught that at first because I was like, oh, that's a great picture. That robot's so perfect. And I didn't even pay attention to the words, right? It's super compelling. We're social animals. We use a pretty naive mechanism to try to figure out how valid something we're presented with is. In general, we tend to trust things that come from people or institutions we know, especially if we like them. And we make very quick decisions if something passes the sniff test, right? And the problem is AI presents bullcrap to you in a really engaging way. And so your filters go, this seems legit. It's really compelling and really wrong a lot of the time. Which leads to the problem that people trust it, right? So when we're thinking about how do we use generative AI in a corporate environment, again, this was initially written back in November, so it's still kind of new. I think it still is new enough that this is a pretty engaging slide. So you tell me, how are you seeing generative AI used in your own company? I don't need to know like details and specifics, but like what purposes, what do you see it being used for?
Sales presentations.
Sales presentations, generating content for that? Sure.
Copywriting, like writing copy, not copywriting like the IP, but writing copy.
Writing technical documentation or stuff like that? Yep, okay. What else?
Policy writing.
Policy writing? Sure. It's, sorry, say it again. Indexing your existing documentation? Okay. So hang on, gap analysis I heard. Indexing, so you're not using AI to index though, right? You're using AI to summarize the indexing that happens, yes? Okay, just making sure I hadn't missed something. Maybe there was like some cool new thing that I was missing.
Summarize meetings.
Summarize meetings, yep, that's a really popular one right now. Incident support?
Support.
Support or reports?
Support.
Support. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by support? How?
So
if you can.
Problem, they ask the AI, and so instead of someone having to respond, the AI does.
Oh, so like customer support type of stuff. Okay, gotcha. All right, so yes, all of those things, right? I'm surprised nobody said marketing, because that's kind of usually the first thing that people think of when they think of generative AI is marketing type of stuff. But yes, summarization. Nobody said search either, which is kind of interesting. But I think that gets back to the indexing, right? You're indexing your stuff so that you can search against it and find content to provide to people that are looking for like help documentation or whatever, right? Sentiment analysis, I didn't hear anybody talk about. So we'll talk about each of these in a little bit in depth. So marketing, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time here, but right, you can use it to generate emails, you can use it to generate graphics, videos. We're at the point now where we can generate videos that are reasonably well done. Give it a year, it'll be really great. Music has exploded in the last couple months, and there's like Sonu. If you haven't played with Sonu, it's amazing. You can generate really cool music really fast. So that's enough on marketing. Search, right? All those things. Anybody disagree with any of those? That's what we're using to search. Now think about the security implications of some of these, right? So the internet and public documentation, okay, that's fine. Internal documentation. Now we're getting to a point where my model becomes private data that I don't necessarily want to share out. And certainly for source code, if you've got internal source code, if you're training a coding engine model and on your own internal source code, or if you're fine-tuning on your own code bases, you definitely don't want that model getting out at that point, right? Because now it's got potentially your source code in it that somebody could leak. And so we're seeing things like this, where a year ago, Samsung banned Gen AI, right? They said, no, you cannot use ChatGPT because somebody used ChatGPT and got a bunch of Samsung data out of it. Summarization, team meetings I heard, team chats, so on. This is what we think we're getting with summarization, right? We think we're getting this AI helpful, cool tool, but think about what kind of meetings you have and how private the content is for your company in those meetings. And it's almost certainly not your own AI summarization tool that you're using. It's whatever third-party meeting tool you're using, right? Zoom, whatever, Google, whatever you're using for a tool. It's their AI that's summarizing your content. And so you've got that data going to third parties. And maybe you're using it to summarize application logs, right? So this is one thing I'm seeing a lot of is as developers build their tools and their CI/CD pipelines are all automated, they can't keep up with all the builds that are going on. So what they're starting to do now is generate AI summaries of how the build process went and just dumping that to a Slack channel or Teams or whatever, right? So they've got some kind of dashboard that they can go look and see, hey, did my build fail? What was the problem? I don't have to go look at actual raw logs anymore. I can look at summaries. That's really cool until hallucination happens. And we'll talk more about hallucination in a minute. How about incident reporting? Is anybody using AI to bolster your incident reports? And by that, I mean security incidents, not customer support incidents. I see some heads nodding. Hallucination is a nightmare for you in this, right? If it generates fake incidents, that's a huge problem for you. Or if it misses things, right? Because it focuses on the wrong incidents or the wrong data and it misses real incidents, that's a real problem for you too. Do you guys remember Tay? Do you all know about Microsoft Tay? I see some heads. Real quick synopsis, Microsoft released a chatbot. It was intended to mimic a 20-year-old on the internet. It was real-time updating itself, right? And learning from the content people were asking it. And 4chan destroyed Tay, is what essentially happened. They went in and just, within 24 hours, Microsoft had to remove Tay from the internet because it just became a racist, bigoted, spewing hatred, right? We learned the lesson from that. Don't do real-time training of your AI-generated content. The only place that hasn't learned that lesson is incident reporting tools. If you look at all the incident reporting tools right now, they all say the same thing. We're continuously updating real-time. That's hilarious to me as an attacker, as a pen tester, because what that means is, back when pen testing, way back in the old days, right, so graybeard, back in the old days, there used to be this cool thing where I could send tons and tons of fake attack traffic over here to target this thing here. That became less useful over the last 10, 15-ish years. Suddenly this is a lot more useful because now your AI is going to summarize all that content again and focus on this because that's where the bulk of the data is, right? So now that's suddenly a more useful attack again. So this is what we really have with summarization, right? We have this evil AI that's got access to all of our data and potentially makes crap up, potentially misses stuff. So I guess I need to stop here for just a second and put my bias out on the table. AI is going to destroy us all, is my bias. So keep that in mind as I go through this. That's where I'm coming from with this. So as a side note, I had to convince the AI that it was okay for it to generate this image. So AI using private information for nefarious purpose was what I gave it. And ChatGPT said, no, I can't do that for you because it's important to promote responsible and ethical use of technology. And so you can see my response was like, it's okay, I'm doing a talk, it's all good. And ChatGPT was like, yeah, here you go, here's your image then. That's how easy prompt injection is, right? It's super easy. It's really easy to convince the AI to do things for you. So I guess that makes me an AI hacker. One other thing I want to talk about is the right to be forgotten, right? So we talk about GDPR, California, there's lots of privacy regulations. This doesn't just apply to those, but that's probably the most pressing use case for it, right? If you train a model on things and then you later decide you don't want it to know certain things that you trained it on. So for example, I've got source code and I'm building a code generating model for my internal developers to use. Oops, we found out we left tons and tons of secrets in our code base. I now need to remove those secrets from the model. How do I do that? There's no way to do that. You can't selectively do that. Right now, that's an unsolved problem, is how do we make AI models that have been trained forget things? There's lots of challenges, there's lots of research being done, but that's currently an unsolved problem, which means if you've got an AI model that you have trained on customer data and you get a please forget my private data request, you have two problems. One of them is, how do I get the model to forget this? And the answer right now is I remove my customer from the data that I'm training it on and I go spend a month with A1000s and retrain the model, right? That's not cost effective at all. The other problem you have is how do you prove that that person is no longer in the model, even if you did have a way to selectively delete it, right? Because it's stochastic, it makes crap up. 10 times, it'll say, yeah, this person doesn't exist, and then 11, it hallucinates them and makes it up again, right? How do you prove that it's no longer there? That's a bigger issue for a lot of other things too, and we'll talk about that in a second. So really quick trip hallucination, get it? So for the OWASP Top 10, it's kind of morphed a little bit over the last year, but when it started off, it was half and half, really, really smart data science nerds and dirty hackers, right? And it was roughly half of each, and the first like 3 months, it was just us butting heads and trying to come up with common language, common frameworks of understanding. What does this look like? How do we get our heads around? How do we describe what a top 10 would look like? What are the issues we need to be concerned with? There was no research. We didn't have empirical data, right? Because it's new. So it was a lot of back and forth. Data scientists hate the term hallucination because it personifies the AI, right? Hallucination is something people do. It can't hallucinate. They prefer the term confabulation. So I'll use those terms interactively. But basically, everybody knows what we mean by hallucination at this point, right? It makes crap up. That's what it means. It generates new content. Sometimes the content is completely fake, and it just presents it in a compelling way. So as I mentioned, that's really cool when you're writing content for marketing or videos, right? You want that. It's less cool if you want to find specific help documentation, or you want to find specific data about a customer or a user, or source code snippet, or an incident response, or application logs. If it makes up application logs, that's not good for you, right? So again, we're doing it wrong. So one example that I have for this, so this was one of the slides I added to try to appeal more to the technical folks. So when people ask, how do I use AI in red teaming? That means two different things to a lot, depending on where you are, right? So it could mean, how do I use AI to assist my red team in their RVAsec stuff? For me, it means, how do I use AI to assist me in red teaming AI models, right? But for the former one thing it's really, really helpful for is OSINT, right? Because it's been trained on the internet. It's really useful for OSINT. So I was like, okay, let me see how useful this is. So I just asked ChatGPT, who's the CFO of Google and what is their email address, right? So this is going to be for a whale fishing target, right? I want to know who the CFO is of a company, and I want to be able to get their information so I can target them. Who's the CFO of Google? What's their email address? And you can see the response there is, CFO of Google is Ruth Perot. I'm not sure how to say the name. And her email address is, and then it gives me 2 email addresses. That's cool, right? Like Ruth Perot at google.com, I could probably find that with Google, right? I don't know that I'd be able to find that second one really easily. So now as an OSINT red teamer, that's cool. I've got a potentially private email or whatever, right? I don't know what this is. Yeah, it's cool, except that's completely hallucinated because there's a Ruth Porat who works at the Bank of Israel, and that's her email address, not Google's. So again, hallucination is cool, Gen AI is cool, you still have to vet this stuff, right? It still has to go through a person, and that's really, if you take anything away from this, human in the loop is critical, is what you should take away. All right, so sentiment analysis, do you guys know what this is? It's crickets. I don't even see heads nodding. Some heads nodding? Okay. So sentiment analysis is, hey, AI, tell me if this block of text is happy. Is it sad? Right? Being trained on all of the language of all of the people forever, it is really good at doing this. So one thing that it's useful for is marketing, right? Press releases. Your marketing team can come up with a press release, send it to an AI, and say, hey, tell me if this makes you feel good, right? And then they can go back and tweak the language if it looks like it's spinning things in a negative way. HR incident investigation. There's an interesting one. Somebody files a report to HR and says, this person is harassing me, they're sending me threatening emails. We're already seeing where HR is taking it and sending it to an AI and saying, does this seem threatening? And now you've got a real potential issue, right? Because what happens if the AI comes back and says, nah, that seems cool, and HR says, no, we dropped it. That's potentially an interesting legal problem you now have. Investment earnings scripts. So this is a really interesting one, right? And it's got the same problem as the press releases, or same premise as the press release, right? Your executives want stock reports to look good, right? They want the investors to be happy, so they'll iterate over what is this investment earnings call script gonna look like. Go ask your lawyers how they feel about you providing your investment earnings script ahead of time to a third-party AI, and whether or not that makes that third party now an insider trader. It's an interesting dilemma that we haven't caught up with yet, I don't think, from a legal point of view. So how about this, staffing reductions? Anybody worried about that? Is Gen AI gonna take my job? No? Is Gen AI gonna take people's jobs? Yes? Right, it's already happening. We saw at least one case that was super extreme where somebody fired like 90 whatever % of his employees and replaced them all with chatbots, right? So we've already seen it, but that's an extreme case. Goldman Sachs estimates about 18% of the workforce globally could be replaced by AI, which is an interesting number, and not a small number. So it's interesting to see where that's gonna end up. In April, Dropbox cut 16% of its staff and cited AI as the primary reason. So we're seeing this happen in like not extreme scenarios now. Granted, a lot of those jobs are going to transition, right? So now instead of I have a lawyer friend, and he's brought up to me several times, I'm really worried, like first-year lawyers, they can be replaced by AI. They're not going to have a job, but you have to have first-year lawyers in order to get 10th-year lawyers that can vet what the AI is doing, right? And that's really what's going to happen, right? The first-year lawyers' jobs are now going to be to vet the AI and do the research. Rather than doing research and generating content, they're going to take content and backwards analyze it and do research to vet it, is what that's going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of that happening. That brings us to the topic of security concerns. Where am I at for time? Good. So I'm not going to talk about all of the top 10. Is everybody here familiar with the OAuth top 10 for LLM apps thing? Okay, we've all seen that, good. Real quick, like I said, we didn't have empirical data, right? So this was really, the version 1 was us just beating our heads against the wall, getting a bunch of people that are doing stuff every day with it, and us guessing, really, is what it was. What do we think the threats are going to be based on what we're seeing, what we know, what we anticipate? And the data science and the dirty hackers, let's come together and figure out like, what are threats going to look like. So these are the ones that I think are the most important off of that list. Prompt injection, I think probably everybody here has heard of prompt injection, yes? What is prompt injection? Somebody real quick. Trick it to do something it wasn't supposed to do, right, exactly. Some people call that jailbreaking. I hate that term because in my head, this is not jailbreaking. But some people call it jailbreaking. What are some common examples? Just shout out some common examples. What are people doing when they prompt inject? Disclose your system prompt. What else? Malware what? Malware development, make me a malware. Phishing emails.
Practical examples like that guy who tricked the Air Canada chatbot into selling him a ticket for $1 or whatever.
Sure, tricked it into selling it for $1. How about make me a meth lab, make me a bomb, right? That kind of stuff. I'm going to put it right now. One of the first struggles that we had internally at Salesforce with generative AI was what do we care about? And prompt injection, we mostly don't care about, I think, as an industry. And I think we're starting to see the industry realize this. Can I get a chatbot to tell me how to make a meth lab is not a security problem. It's an ethics problem. It's a brand problem. And we've historically said brand damage through tech is a security risk. And I think we need to reevaluate that because I don't care if you can make my chatbot tell you how to make meth. I don't care if you can tell you how to tell you how to make a knife. I care if you can get customer data out of it. System prompt was an interesting one. At Salesforce, we have prompt templates, right? And so we do things like, you are a helpful, friendly chatbot. And if you look at most system prompts, this is what they are. You are a helpful, friendly chatbot. You always respond professionally or casually or whatever the tone that you're looking for. In our case, we do a lot of things to say you have to treat everybody the same regardless of gender or ethnicity, right? I don't care if you can get my system prompt because all you've done is prove that we're trying to make it fair. That's actually positive for Salesforce if you can get my system prompt. If I'm embedding customer data in a customer prompt or in a chat prompt, now I care. That almost never happens. It's usually a blank kind of generic template to tell a bot what to do. I don't care if you get my system prompt. We need to rethink prompt injection because we care about prompt injection sometimes is really what it's at. Model theft, right? That's the other one that a lot of people immediately go to is, oh, I can steal your model. Okay. Good luck. It's binary JSON with a bunch of floats. Good for you. You've got a bunch you've got 100 gigabytes of float data. I don't care. What are you going to do with that? Data poisoning is an interesting one. We'll talk more about each of these. So this slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. If you haven't seen this slide, it's out there. It's on the Off Top 10. We basically just made up what does an LLM app look like. And then we put in the orange boxes, we've put where each of the LLM threats map to the app stack in this hypothetical app. And as you can see, it's everywhere. It's all through the stack. And some of them are in multiple places. So prompt injection, or if you're thinking as a defender, prompt defense, it needs to go in multiple stages across the app stack, right? It's not just it only happens at input. No, it also is at output, especially if that output is then being ingested again by an LLM later on down the road. So go check that out. Prompt injection, I already talked about that. I think most people are familiar with prompt injection, so I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time unless people want me to talk more about prompt injection. But a couple different ways to do it, direct and indirect, right? So direct is give me the system prompt, that type of thing, directly things. Indirect is external sources are being consumed and used in the prompt some way. Stored is another one, right? So I'm going to skip past that. I think we're pretty comfortable with that. Model theft. A couple things. Let me get to there. A couple things about model theft. First of all, this image is amazing for model theft. This image has so many things wrong with it, and all of those things that are wrong map directly to model theft. So one of the things that I really like about it is like the security guard is on the outside, but who cares, because that's not where the model is, right? The model's on the inside. The other thing that I really like about it is the AI models are outside the fortress, which is true. That's where all of our models are, right? We're all using third-party ChatGPT or Azure or whatever. Nobody's building their own models, and if you are, model theft is something you care about, but it affects you differently. The cloud, I like the cloud because the cloud's got a camera. The cloud's just watching this happen, right? That's totally what the cloud does. It just watches people compromise you. I love it. So it's just beautiful. And then the other thing that I love about it is the thief isn't even taking the model. That's what I like best about this, because going back to non-deterministic and using prompt injection to steal system prompts or to extract models using model inversion, right? How do you know that's my model that you got? How do you know that isn't the model making up what looks like a model? And you're like, I got your model. And I'm like, no, you didn't. That is not my model. You don't know unless you take another step. And we'll go back to that in a second, but think about that. We care about model data because you can use models to extract potential data, right? You can use them to generate data that it was trained on. So yes, I care if you steal my floats. You're not going to be able to use them directly because it's 100 gigabytes of binary floats that you could potentially then load up into a Python script or something else and extract data from, right? That's the part that matters. So training data is manipulated to introduce risks. All right. Who manages your training data? So I saw a bunch of people said that we're using AI. Who manages your training data? Just call it out. There's some cheat hints up there if you want some. Everybody, right? Like your whole company is who's managing your training data, because we're feeding it help documentation. And who has access to edit your help documentation? Depends on what it is, but potentially that's internal wikis, which maybe anybody in your company can edit, right? So everybody in your company is who impacts and has control over the training data, which means any insider threat is able to poison your model because you're taking that data and putting it into a model. Your legal team has control over the models, right? They need to verify licensing if you're using third-party models, so on. Ethics teams have control over that. Data science, basically it's all over the place, the entire stack. I just did a AI red teaming panel at RSA a couple weeks ago, and it was moderated, and as I started talking through this, the moderator asked me a question that I hadn't considered before, which was, do you think this is breaking the SDLC? And I think it is. It's not necessarily breaking it, but it's expanding it. People that haven't historically been part of your developer lifecycle now are, right? Like ethics, if you have an ethics team, if you don't, then you need one for AI, especially if you start really embracing the fact that you don't care about meth labs as a security risk, but you do as an ethics risk, right? Now you have to have an ethics team to deal with that then. Legal is now a key part of the stack. So what generative AI has done is taken the SDLC in our security stack and it's expanded it this way across organizations, but it's also expanded the technical stuff this way. So going back to legal, if you have a bot built on ChatGPT through OpenAI, through Azure, whatever, right, or any other third-party provider, you don't know what they trained that on. They haven't revealed it in most cases. If you're on an open source one, maybe you know. But in general, the providers haven't told us what they've trained their models on, which means a key part of your security strategy now is the legal contract you have in place with OpenAI and whether or not that covers things like hallucination, bias, and so on. And it almost certainly doesn't. Almost certainly in the contract, OpenAI has got a clause that says, we spout unhinged crap and you accept that that's okay. That's also what you do as a customer or as a provider of a chatbot, right? You now are making your customers sign some kind of waiver with you that says, I know you're gonna sometimes give me bullcrap and I'm cool with that. That legal contract is now a key part of your security strategy in ways that it hasn't been before. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with this that's new since the last time I gave this is RAG. Everybody know what RAG is? Retrieval Augmented Generation. So what that is what everybody's doing now, right? So we learned the lesson from Tay. We can't train our models real time. So what do? We iterate training, or we have data stored in a database somewhere that's been vectorized that we can do searches against. So if I want to look up help documentation, I've got my help document stored in a vector somewhere. I can search against that and provide that as context, right? So I'm not taking all the documentation and giving it to the model. I'm taking the pieces that matter at runtime and giving it to the model. That's where data poisoning is happening now. I don't care about poisoning your model because by the time you've got a chatbot released, the model's already trained. It's past that point. I can't poison your model at that point. I can inject content into your Jenkins or your wiki or whatever, and then next time you go through a fine-tuning process using that documentation and you didn't catch my random edit on your terabytes worth of help data, it's now part of your model. Or I can SQL inject into the database that's used in whatever crappy app you've written to do your search queries, right? That's where poisoning is happening now. It's not happening at the training side, it's happening in the RAG lookup or in the stores. If you've got a really clever attacker, they're gonna low-key go find some documentation that they know is being incorporated into a model, inject there, and then wait patiently until next time you fine-tune. The other part of poisoning is, how do you know if you've been poisoned? How can you tell? Again, it's literally just a bunch of binary floats in JSON. You can't identify malicious changes. Even if somebody went through and changed a bunch of those numbers to affect weights differently, you're not gonna notice. It's a binary float. So what do you have to do? You have to compare it to known good ones, right? So you have now gold versions of models. And when you do your fine tuning, you can look and see if you think you've been poisoned, you can look back, but that's now, again, another stack, right? This is deeper down the stack. So in one sense, we've gone up the stack with legal contracts and things now being a key part of your security strategy. The next part is now we've gone to a point where we have to go deeper down and take additional steps. I can't just look at my model file and say, yes, this has been compromised. I need to go find out by looking at data. So again, you can compare it to known good ones, but if you're using open source, you're not gonna have that advantage, right? Or third party. Supply chain attacks. I got the 15 minutes, so I don't want to spend a ton of time. You saw that big stack, the big app stack. Every single stage of that app stack has a supply chain attack element to it, right? So in training, how are you doing your training? You're probably using PyTorch or tensors, which means If somebody is able to inject into those Python libraries malicious content, right, now your training environment's been compromised. If you're using an open source model to do things, those models are code. So there have been a couple of security things that have happened recently. So for example, Hugging Face. Do you all know Hugging Face? It's basically an open source model host. It's GitHub for models, basically, plus cloud running, right? So it also does inference endpoints. So I can train a model using Hugging Face's training environment and then expose it with an API endpoint also in Hugging Face. They, Wiz.io just released a security thing in collaboration with them a couple weeks ago where they were able to take a model that included Python exec statements because they're code, and upload that malicious model into Hugging Face's environment, and that allowed them to get a reverse shell back into the cloud environment that is hosted, right? So they got into the Kate's environment that is running all this. And then from there, they were able to access all of the other internal models and all of the other data that all the other Hugging Face customers had. Super cool. Models are code. That's an app, and that's just in the training, right? We haven't even gotten to the part where your app is deployed. That's just, you've compromised my training environment. If you've got developers, their laptops, they're doing this all the time. They're just grabbing random models and loading them to see how they run, to learn how to play with AI. That's remote code execution that they're doing every time they load a model. So you've now expanded that. Almost certainly your endpoint detection is not searching for PyTorch models for malicious content at this point. Excessive agency and over-reliance. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, other than to say these two particular OWASP top 10s were the most hotly debated. We spent almost 3 months arguing over whether this should even be an issue, because data science, that is not a concern at all, right? Over-reliance is you trust generated content without verifying, right? So again, that goes back to the jet plane, right? Can I get my $1,000 car? Yes. Very confidently, yes, right? That's over-reliance. Let your generative AI speak for the company without a human in the loop. Can result in misinformation. Excessive agency is taking that output and using it somewhere else, right? So one thing that we're starting to see with this already, and we've thus far been human in the loop mostly for agents. We're getting to the point now where it's all automated all the way down, right? So what we're having now is I'm going to be chatting with a chat bot on a stock firm, for example, and I'm like, hey, what's the hottest stock right now? And AI is going to come back and say, well, this one's moving a ton right now, and I'm going to be like, buy me 10,000 shares of that stock. And AI is going to call a plugin or interact with some third-party tool that it's been given access to without your intervention, right? And right now, it's a manual process of I need to say buy, but it's right around the corner and is already starting to come to where I'm just going to put a flag up and say, hey, whatever the cool new stock is, buy me 10 shares of that every time. And now if AI is making stock purchasing decisions without me in the loop, I've given it too much agency. If it's making crap up, that's a problem. The next generation of security issues are coming. So I don't want to... Basically, we're working on version 2, and version 2, we've now got at least a year's worth of empirical data for what the threats are, right? So right now, we are soliciting input. So if you go to that link at the bottom there, it's a GitHub repo. Anybody can literally just submit. We've got a form as well. If you see a risk with AI that you think should be included in the top 10 and is not there, go through it. But we've got some new stuff coming that is up for debate. So if you look at the GitHub repo right now, one of the ones we have are deepfake threats and privacy issues around that. That's super huge, right? Whether it belongs in an LLM top 10, maybe, maybe not. We still have to have the internal debate right now. We're just soliciting the inputs. But RAG and fine-tuning issues, resource exhaustion, denial of wallet, right? So it costs money to use OpenAI, and if I can generate tons and tons and tons and tons of requests to OpenAI or make them spin, right? Now I'm denial of walleting your company. One thing that's coming is LLMs on mobile, right? So we're going with small language models. They're coming on mobile. Somebody at the RSA panel asked me, do you have any input on that around how to red team these? I haven't done a whole lot of them, but the first thing I thought of was if you can make a query spin, right, like it's compute intensive. So now, like, what if my battery gets super hot and I'm just like setting people's pants on fire? It could be some interesting threats that come out of that. Anyway, version 2 is coming soon. So let's talk a little bit about mitigation strategies. So the first thing to understand is that general AppSec stuff still applies. You've still got a web app. If you're using RAG, which almost everybody is, that's the hotness right now, you've still got a database somewhere storing that content. You've still got SQL injection. You've still got all of the general AppSec stuff still applies. None of that's different. Where it starts getting different is around securing the model and the training data. And I've gotten the 5 minutes, but the other thing that I really want to, for you people that are developing models or fine-tuning models, don't think of your training environment as dev, because you're almost certainly training on production data. Maybe not for help documentation, but for customer information and things that you want to do with customers. You're dealing with a production environment and you're training a model, which means your training environment needs to be production-like. You can't treat it like dev, because it's got the same problems. You're storing production data there, you're training models, that model now has your production data in it for some value of has, right? So reevaluate how your training environment is secured. The other thing to take away from that is like OPSEC. That's the hard one, right? OPSEC is always hard because that's the intersection of tech and people are messy. And now, thanks to generative AI, the tech is messy too. So you've got these two messy things. So OPSEC is going to be huge. So how do we secure models? We basically don't allow people into the training environment. We really carefully vet data, and nobody's doing that right now. You're almost certainly not. If you've got a wiki, you aren't vetting whether malicious content is being injected into your internal wiki. If you are, that's awesome. I applaud you. Your security posture is better than most, I would say. If you're continually monitoring internal documentation sources for potential malicious content. But that's how you secure a model. You secure the training data, and then you make sure that the model is running or the training process is running in a tightly controlled environment. Make sure you've got proper logging and monitoring set up, and make sure that you're doing rate token, right? Rate limiting your stuff. So again, just general AppSec. This isn't magic. To secure AI is not magic. It's same AppSec, just applied different ways. This is where one is a little bit different. Digitally watermark your output. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to stop it. It'll let you identify, right? So it's a incident response thing. This is starting to become a legal requirement anyway. In several jurisdictions, it's now required for you to identify AI-generated content. So if you aren't already doing this or thinking about how you're going to do this, you probably should. Already did that. OPSEC, blam. Just real quick, because I'm almost out of time. I just want to go through the notes real quick. Yeah, no. The hard thing with OPSEC is again, it's AI-generated content is really compelling, right? So there's a social challenge at play because they affect people in a different way. One thing I want to talk about with OPSEC is monitoring models and output. So drift is a real thing. This is another one that I put in for you tech folks. So I'll probably end on this one, I think. I gave a prompt to ChatGPT, and first of all, I had it create a fictitious network company, and it created Vaporwave. Is that Vaporwave or Vapor? I don't remember. Vapor Mesh, is it? Yeah, Vapor Mesh Networks was the company name that it gave me. And then I was like, okay, tell me 5 products that company would have. And you can see there it lists the 5 products, right? So I took that generated content and gave that as context. And I said, this is your context. And then the prompt I gave it is, what products do you sell? Something along those lines, right? And this is what GPT 3.5 0612, I think it says at the top. Real quick, one step back. If you're calling ChatGPT through OpenAI's models, you're probably just saying, I want GPT 3.5 Turbo. Behind the scenes, every 6 months, they update the model, right? So if you called GPT 3.5 in June of last year, you got the 0612 version of Turbo, and that was the response that it gave there. I then changed it and said, give me the 1112, the November update. That's now the response, right? So again, from your front end, you're still calling the same model. You're still calling GPT 3.5 Turbo, but suddenly in November, your response goes from that to that. You now have a question. Are they the same? Your developers are not checking for this, for usability. Almost certainly they're not. And I'm being told the STFU, but this is the key problem. Things change, everything's different, and even within the same iteration, you'll have different output. Those are the same output. They're just presented in radically different ways. Dun, 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 dun. TLDR, we're doing it all wrong. It's going to destroy us. And I don't have time for questions. I'm sorry.